Hello, good afternoon. I'm just going to do a quick, it won't be that quick live stream of where I'm up to. Today is Wednesday the 9th of October and it's 12:44 p.m. here in southern Sweden. I am going to just start here on this page. This is Google Earth, and I was just spinning round the globe because I was looking in down here. That arrow there is actually Raqqa in northern Syria, where the Americans have withdrawn and the Turkish are going in there, and there's news reports of Islamic State sleeper cells kicking off down there, and it's been noticed on the internet that the usual PR spin that follows that isn't actually happening. Now, ISIS was created and Al-Qaeda were created by the CIA. That's pretty well known, I think. If you've heard of someone called what's he called, Sendli Jabinsky or something, I can't say his name. I'm rubbish at pronouncing these Eastern European names. He was actually American, but when the Russians were occupying Afghanistan back in the day, here's Afghanistan over here, look, and Pakistan. If we just come out a bit, just to give people a bit of a idea. What's happening now? No, that's... Right, okay. So, anyway, Afghanistan is here. Iran is here, Turkey is here, Syria is here, Iraq is here, and this is what it's all about. Iran and Iranian oil, the 1979 Iranian revolution, and prior to that, in the 1950s, the overthrow of Mossadegh, who was the elected Iranian leader then, who was overthrown. That's all wrapped up in the Suez Crisis and Egypt. Egypt is here. I'm not sure if it helps to go in a bit. And the Middle East, the hydrocarbons, both gas and crude oil, and the shipping lanes and the pipelines, the gas pipelines, particularly the gas pipelines which pass through Ukraine into particularly Germany. And there's a thing called Nord Stream, which the USA really don't like as well. That's all to do with gas pipelines up in Northern Europe. But you then have to come down here to Myanmar here, okay, and then there's China is here, okay, Japan is here, and then the Russian Federation is huge, and Africa is huge. If we just come around here, here's the United States, so this is North America, Canada, which is huge, Alaska up here, okay, and then this bridges across the top of the world here. Then you've got Siberia, Alaska, Siberia coming round into Russia. Okay, you've got the North Pole up here somewhere, Greenland, Iceland, and it's the Barents Sea here. Sweden, where I am here, Finland. You can see Europe. Europe is pretty tiddly when you compare it to Africa. South America, I think Brazil is huge. Chile, which is very long and thin. Argentina down here. But then, that's the land masses. Look at the oceans. The South Atlantic Ocean. The Indian Ocean. The Pacific Ocean. Look, the North Pacific, the South Pacific. Look, I mean, you can get this view, spin the globe. You get Australia, New Zealand, here's Antarctica here. But look, that's virtually half of the globe. Remember, it's spherical. And that is water, and it's very, very deep. Now, when you look at this in context and just try and take this in, think about in terms of world population and everything that we're told about overpopulation and about the impact that man is having on the environment. At a localized level, I don't dispute that, and that we are not the best custodians of our immediate environments. I accept that. But there is a lot of wilderness out there, and there is a lot which remains unmeasured, unexplored, and unmonitored. Satellites give us a record, but we've only had them since 1979. So in terms of climate change, you have to look at the University of Alabama Huntsville record, which is kept by Professor John Christie and another guy, Roy Spencer, Dr. Roy Spencer. But when we're told by a 16-year-old girl from the country I live in, Sweden, that we all really need to do our homework and our house is on fire, one has to say, oh really? Number one, unless these oceans were all covered in oil, it would not be on fire, would it? But I don't want to be flippant about this. I think what this globe should do is make us all realise the limited amount of experience it's possible to actually have in this world. In Africa, the only country in Africa I've actually visited is Zimbabwe. In the Middle East, the countries I've visited there, I've been to Israel and I've been to Egypt. Israel itself, I've actually been to Eilat. I've been to Greece and I've been to Cyprus. I've never been to Iran. I've got I've had Persian friends in the past. I've never been to India or Pakistan. I have a very close friend, a blood brother, Raz. He's from Pakistan. He's actually from up here in the mountains, which is Kashmir. China, I've never been to China. China's huge. Russia, I've never been to Russia. I've been to Finland. I've been to Finland, which is getting quite close to St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg actually used to be part of Sweden. I haven't been to Estonia, Latvia or Lithuania. I have, however, been to Rostock, northern Germany, in Pomerania, up here. I haven't actually been to Poland. I've been to Leipzig a long time ago, which is the former East Germany. Many years ago, I lived in Dusseldorf, and many years before that, I lived in Hanover. So I've been to Hamburg and Bremen and Dortmund and Essen, and I went to school between Dusseldorf and sort of Belgium. So I know Belgium pretty well. France. I've spent a lot of time in France, particularly down here. Let's see if we can find. There we are, the Ile d'Oléron. I used to visit there every year for several weeks. My ex-wife's parents had a place on the Ile d'Oléron. And Spain. I've been to Spain and Portugal. I've been to Mallorca, things like that. Italy. I used to go to Venice fairly often, and also Sicily. I absolutely adore Sicily. Where's Taormina? If you ever want to feel like a 1950s sort of film star, that's still the place to go, driving down along there. Absolutely beautiful. I mean, it really is just the most wonderful thing, Google Earth. And I could go, you know, I could spin around here for absolutely hours on end. But the takeaway point I want to make here is Africa is huge, and the EU, Guy Verhofstadt, King Leopold, who was the king of Belgium when they tried to colonize the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. And look, it's huge, it's resource rich, absolutely beautiful. Tanzania, I have a good friend that's worked in Dar es Salaam for many years. He works for a charity called Habitats for Humanity. And I'd love to actually visit Tanzania. Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia. I mean, there's a good argument to be made for Ethiopia actually being the seat and of civilization. Haile Selassie and the Rastafari religion. Now here's Yemen, and of course what's happening in Yemen at the moment is absolutely terrible. Oman. But look at the map. Just look at the map. And its force of arms and imposition of debts which are keeping Africans and people in the Middle East and India and Pakistan, etc. These Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, Vietnam, etc. In bondage, really, and it's a bondage which is in store for the rest of us if we're not very, very careful. It's the bondage which federalists in the EU would subject us to. It's also the bondage which globalists and New World Order types in the United States of America would subject us to. They're neoconservatives and they're rhinos, Republicans in name only. They're Democrats who are neoliberals, you know, the Clintons and what have you. And their ideology has infected, you know, the whole of the world. It started off actually down here in Chile. And General Pinochet's regime, where the Chicago boys, one Milton Friedman, tried economic experiments in Chile, overthrowing the elected leader Allende, who had begun to actually bring back into public ownership various state natural monopolies which had been appropriated by global capitalists, crony capitalists, colonial capitalists, mercantilists. Similarly, this has happened in Bolivia, Brazil, Venezuela. Look at something called the Monroe Doctrine, which is not dissimilar to the Jean Calvin, who once said the poor must remain poor so that they remain obedient. Mexico, the Gulf of Mexico, the great state of Texas, Houston, a great oil port. Cuba, similar story in Cuba. The name War is a Racket, Smedley Butler, the most decorated US Marine ever, Smedley Butler, wrote a book in the 1930s, High Class Muscle for the Banks of Wall Street, high class muscle for capitalism. He said that Al Capone had managed to run his protection racket in a few cities, but mainly in Chicago, whereas he'd done it in both hemispheres. The Royal Marines, their first action on European soil was actually in the late 1800s, and it was in Libya. Look it up, you'll see that is the case. The French franc, still used in Mali, Algeria. Swedish troops presently on EU duty, helping out Macron's fascists in the French Empire, which is still extant in what they would say are former French colonies. So it's interesting to look at a map and have a little flick around and see what you know or what you can figure out. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Special Rendition, the Iraq War, both of them. The Gulf War was the first one, and the second one specifically called the Iraq War in 2003. And Ambassador Craig Murray, who wrote about Uzbekistan being used for special rendition and how he effectively was thrown out of the club for saying, well, actually, no, that's against international law. There's some very interesting pictures at the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, with the president of Kazakhstan, which is a resource-rich former part of the Soviet Union. Here's the Caspian Sea here. There's a wonderful geopolitics channel on YouTube called the Caspian Report, well worth watching. And you can see why they would know rather a lot about geopolitics. Being from this way, Georgia, this is where Joseph Stalin actually came from, Georgia. He was the tyrant who took over the running of the Soviet Union when Lenin died, and there we are. These are lots of pins on a map of locations I identified for a business plan which I drew up at the end of last year. Denmark and across Sweden. So anyway, there's some context. Now, what have we got here? Swedish theory of love. I did a search for that term earlier. I think it's opening this window here. Okay, what is the Swedish theory of love? It's a film made by a Italian Swedish film director, and there's a link to it on this blog here. You can go to it and have a look, and it talks about how the Swedish state, under, or at its apotheosis, if you like, at its high point, Olof Palme and his democratic socialists sought to turn Sweden into the first nation of independent autonomous people, and the result of that with respect to the family unit and how people felt in families and communities. And what is Swedish consensus? It kind of gets to that question, or the heart of that question. And Swedish consensus is it's not an accepting sort of consensus. I would even argue it's not even a tolerant sort of consensus. It's a consensus which exists to coerce and to bend individual free will and individual spirit to the will of the state mandated consensus. And it is not libertarian in any way, shape or form. And if you watch that film, you get an idea of what the immigrant experience is in Sweden. Now, I have a watered down immigrant experience of Sweden in that I'm a white middle class man who has had, or been fortunate to have been quite successful, certainly in my sort of 20s and 30s and 40s. I'm in my mid 50s now, and unfortunately my independent means are not what they once were, and being in Sweden has become increasingly more of a challenge for me. Now, what this documentary does say or show is how, with all of the mass immigration that's happened in Sweden, the experience of the brown migrants, if you like, I don't think are nearly as pleasant as my own, and I do think Swedes are basically jingoistic, and the average immigrant doesn't actually get to become employed independent or independent of the state for something like 7 or 8 years. That's the average, and that's not a great way to integrate people. And the Swedes did basically and have basically condescended to the migrants that have come here in many ways, and a couple of years ago they did realise that they'd erred, and they kind of figured it out a bit better. Now, the Gateston Institute is a extremely, I say, right-wing American thing, think tank, and they brief against Sweden all the time, and I'm by no means someone that blows smoke up the Swedish backside, far from it, but the criticisms that are made of Sweden are, oh, it's socialist and it's the left and it's that, and Sweden isn't left-wing. I mean, this is and I've pointed this out today to someone who trotted out another load of this crap today, and I said Sweden isn't left-wing at all. Sweden practices state monopoly capitalism in the Roosevelt/Mussolini mode, i.e. fascism. So much so that I actually have joked ever since I've lived here that it's actually the Fourth Reich, and it isn't left-wing. It simply isn't, and it isn't socialist either. National socialism and the state demanding authority and the Prussian way of doing things. If you look up Taylor Gatto's work on the Prussian influence in education in the United States, for instance, you'll actually find all of this and this idea and these ideas. And those sort of Prussian sort of ideas on the globe just now, I pointed out Rostock, the northern part of Germany, Pomerania. I mean, that is sort of Prussia out of central casting, if you like. And then that gets into the Otto von Bismarck side of Germany, and the stuff that put the wind up the Brits, and caused all of the tensions which actually led to the First World War, which had more to do with British colonial hegemony and seafaring power, and feeling threatened by Bismarck's genius, and basically Kaiser Wilhelm cocked it up and screwed up all of Bismarck's good work in some respects. There's a lot to pick out of the bones, but what you've read in your school history books is almost certainly wrong. It's only a question of the degree to which it's wrong, not whether it's wrong or not. They're all wrong. They're wrong in differing degrees. And the way history is taught in Sweden here to kids, because I have conversations with my wife, and she's Swedish, went to Swedish school, and they have a different take on it to my bog standard British education, and they don't marry up. Now, that's another point about the internet. The internet allows people like me to get online and say to the whole world, no one listens, but to say potentially to the whole world, well, I compared notes with my and her Swedish education says about, say, what happened in Britain in such and such was this and that, and that may not be of what I've done. Now, that's actually people talking outside of the immediate control system that dominates them, which is done through the media. And to understand how that used to work, you need to read something called the Smith-Mundt Act, which is a piece of US legislation, obviously applicable to the US, which basically said that Voice of America, which is the foreign broadcasting service, a little bit like the Radio 4's foreign radio service, they're not allowed to broadcast Voice of America to Americans. You see, because it's propaganda. But obviously what the Americans are telling foreigners in their territories is not what they want people in their own country to know what they're saying or what they're doing. And this is an old problem which goes all the way back to Metternich, who was the German foreign minister, and a guy called Castlereagh, who was a British foreign minister, and Henry Kissinger, Dr. Henry Kissinger, the father of modern realpolitik, if you like, wrote his doctoral thesis about this problem of foreign policy and what a state needs to do in terms of furthering its foreign policy goals are usually at odds with what a domestic population would tolerate one, if directed on itself, but two, as a projection of their own values to the rest of the world. And therein you have the problem of the internet, in that it's possible to see what's being done in our name abroad, and by and large we don't like it, and we wouldn't like it done to us. Well, here's the deal. We've got to get used to it being done to us, because the new model is that what used to be done oppressively outside of our borders, the general idea in this one world government that's coming is that that's what will be done to the plebs, us lot, by the elites, that lot, they who must be obeyed. And the Nazis, Hitler had a thing, so obedience to above and authority to below. It was a slogan, the same as blood and soil. And it's a fascist ideology and a Prussian ideology, in Prussia as well they had the idea of straight out of Plato and the Republic that there were classes of citizens. This is the whole idea of the Calvinist predestination. So all of the anti-Semites out there, number one, fuck off, but number two, the idea of chosenness or the chosen people and all the rest of it is alive and kicking and very, very well in a strain of Christianity. Now, I'm a Christian, but I'm a chapel boy. I'm a good Welsh boy, and so I come from a non-conformist tradition, so I'm quite, I'm basically Jewish, like Jesus was in that sense, well, the chances are Jewish, that Jesus was actually black. I'm not black, I know that, but I'm certainly Jewish with a cultural. This is the thing. You see, militant atheists think they can offend you by making jokes about this stuff. I listen. If a joke's funny, it's bloody funny, isn't it? It's ironic or whatever, absurd, or I love all that. And I like a bit of banter too. But I don't. I have absolutely no tolerance or sympathy with, race hate, religious hate, bigotry, all of those things. And yet I am a conservative, white, middle class, all of these things. I dare say, even a gammon or whatever. And yet, the black shirts of political correctness and so-called the centre, to me, I kind of look at them and think, oh, good God, what's the difference between them and the black shirts or the brown shirts? So there you have it. So anyway, the Swedish theory of love, and then this blog goes into talking about Swedish perceptions, and there's a few of his other films, Videocracy. Now, Videocracy was made a good few years back now, and I think it could be brought back up to date, if you like, for the internet. And then with the internet, there's some good films that have been made, not least the one that was made called Hyperland, by Douglas Adams, who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. As we're scrolling down here, this is getting back to the beginning now. Icon Earth is a documentary made by my friend David Malone back in 1995-1996, and it was an examination of neoliberalism, and looking at how that's kind of being co-opted. And here, this is a fantastic website called The Technocratic Tyranny, written by a computer scientist called Vicky Davis, who's retired now. And this tracks the Green New Deal all the way back to 1992 to this thing here. And in Sao Paulo, Brazil, something called the Earth Summit. And have a look at this. Have a look at this and see what they're saying. This guy here, Maurice Strong, you know, original globalist and hypocrite. I mean, taught Al Gore everything he knows, I dare say. Here's his keynote address from Gore, and then here is him speaking at the Spiritual Leaders Forum, and the Dalai Lama is there, and John Denver, who died in a plane crash. Great singer, good songs, and all the rest of it. Here's Jane Fonda, Ted Turner, CNN, all of that. Fake news, you are fake news. I say you are fake news, you are fake boobs. Anyway, look, have a look at that, and you know, a few pennies will start to drop at how long they've been at this. Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. There's a wonderful video on my BitChute channel, which is here's my BitChute channel. Here, look. Oh, it's dropped out at the top. Oh no, here it is. Look, International System Depopulation Globalization Explained by a guy called Kevin Galilee, and he's a brilliant guy. He's suffered for his truth telling, has to be said. I hope he's well. But have a look at that, because that kind of nails it down, and he does it very well. And if you're new to the idea that our lords and masters tell the old porky pie, you might want to sort of watch it with a friend, because it will engender a huge amount of cognitive dissonance, huge discomfiture, and it may not, or may well piss you off just a little bit. Yeah, that's my BitChute channel, and there are lots of interesting things on there. But let's just stick with the environmental movement, 1992, whatever, and what's really going on, just for now, because there's someone else I want to talk about, and that's the much maligned Alex Jones. And Alex, at the beginning of his career, made some really interesting and very good documentaries, and one of the first things he appeared on British television was this series here, made by a guy called John Ronson. I've got them all here on this BitChute channel. And this one here, part 4, The Satanic Shadow Elite, conspiracy theorist and radio host Alex Jones. Okay, watch that. It's a bit of an eye. I watched the whole series. It's very, very good. And then, as we just come down here, this is another fantastic. Alex made a thing about the Oklahoma City bombings, but this documentary, The Noble Lie, is a very good documentary about what was happening. And this is where it all got going, you see. Well, this is under the Clintons. Bill Clinton was the president then. We're going to get to where we're going in a minute. Where are we now? So, let's just keep going here. There we go. There we are. We're getting near now. We're getting near. Here we are. This is a clip taken from this Endgame, made in 2007. And Endgame describes pretty much everything that's happening now in the world, and how it explains United States militarized police being drawn from outside of the United States, something that's accelerating at the moment, but it's something the EU is doing too. And mercenaries have traditionally been used by rulers to suppress their populations at home. And remember the point I made about the Smith-Mundt Act, and about how we don't tolerate things being done in our name abroad that we wouldn't do ourselves, and that happens all the time. Well, of course, when power is called to account and they say, hey, you can't do that, they will say, well, actually, we can because we have the monopoly on violence. And you say, all right, well, get up your dukes, you know, we'll fight, you know, let's have a... They don't want to arm wrestle over it. They'll pull in the mercenaries and say, you know, I'll raise you your pitchfork. Here's my submachine gun wielding, militarized mercenary, and this is part of the reason why Erica Chernoworth's work should give us all hope, in that the way is non-cooperation. Anyway, and then there's this long talk, Dr. Webster Tarpley talking about John Holdren, who was the scientific advisor to President Obama, and basically what a load of rubbish Holdren actually believed. Paul Ehrlich, the whole pseudo-faux environmental fascists, that lot, who have been leading Greta Thunberg astray. That's the 16-year-old girl from the country I live in, Sweden. There you go, back to the referendum broadcast from April 1997, given by James Goldsmith. There's another one done by Alan Sked, who started UKIP, or was the first leader of UKIP. And again, they're already saying this is what the EU are trying to do. So the fact that the themes are similar shouldn't surprise us any more than it surprises us that McDonald's serve the same muck all over the world, so do Kentucky Fried Chicken, and so do Coca-Cola. It's globalisation, and globalisation is one size fits all, or doesn't fit all, as it were. So anyway, that's what I want to do. Just an end game by now. I disagree with Alex Jones about most things, probably, but I do like him, and he's right about a lot of things, and as with a lot of analysts who can be very right about a lot of things, what they feel is the right prescription, okay, is not necessarily the right thing. And think of it this way: say a scientist who's an expert at, say, butterflies, and they'll know everything about butterflies. They're a great person to go and ask to about butterflies, yeah, and they know a lot about them. But you wouldn't ask someone that knows a lot about butterflies to tell you what to do about your slug problem, would you, in your garden? And it's the same general thing, you know. Experts and who are highly specialised in one area are no more well endowed than the rest of us to talk about what to have for dinner. You know, so, well, I'm an expert, so we should have fish and chips, shouldn't we? Well, I don't want fish and chips. I want, you know, whatever. I want spaghetti bolognese. Isn't that reminds me of that funny joke? George Bush II said that the French haven't got a word for an entrepreneur. Very, very funny. I'm not sure it's true if he also said the Italians don't have a word for spaghetti bolognese, but that's another question, is it not? So, anyway, this was the blog I put together this morning, and this blog, okay, is the title of this this live stream. It's Through the Eye of a Needle. Now, Through the Eye of the Needle, The Future of Global Competition, author Gopi Kumar Bulusu. Now, I was looking on Twitter earlier, and it linked to this very, very good paper on global competition, starting from brass tacks. Now, it's great. It breaks things down. It's, you know, it's in easily understood language, and it proposes a model and a system for how things can work, might work, what might happen. It's covers a lot of ground in 27 pages, and it is very good. It's very well written, and these are the models it proposes.